there's no better feeling than seeing that javelin soar past, what you thought was your physical limit. I'd love to be throwing javelin for the rest of my life. I probably got a bit lazier as I got older because I started off as a middle distance athlete and started moving down the distances from kind of 8 and 15s to 4s, 2s, 1s. Eventually thought, look, I'm going to try something different. I reached out to Cardiff Athletics, who I trained with previously because I now live in Cardiff. Told them I was thinking about javelin. First couple of throws, I was like, this sport is awesome. Very short term, I just want to really do a lot of work on improving technically and really nailing like the technical basics of javelin. I'd love to break the 50-meter barrier. Like that for me is a really big personal target. And fundamentally, I just want to keep competing. Like 10, 15, 20, 30, 40 years, I still want to be Gary throwing his javelin. I do feel like I missed out on a good few years of athletics where I just kind of lost myself a bit in my 20s. What I'd give now as an older athlete to go back and be in my 20s and doing something, even if it is at a lower standard, just to be out competing. And yes, competition's, great, but persevere through the difficult times and really focus on just enjoying it.
Gary, you were initially a track athlete. I know you do your javelin throwing now, but that's not actually how you started out in athletics. So what prompted that change for you to go from track to javelin in the end as a masters athlete?
Yeah, of course. So I've been around athletics since I was about 13. It was actually my maths teacher, a guy called Pete Banks, who got me into athletics. And I started off at Coventry Godiva Harriers, where I completely fell in love with the sport. I was really lucky because they had lots and lots of incredible athletes when I was training there. I'd see the likes of Bill Adcox and Marlon Devonish, Dave Moorcroft and Glyn Tromans, and I'm kind of mesmerized by these incredible athletes. And that just made me kind of fall in love with the sport. I guess as I got older, my body changed in terms of, what I felt I was capable of. I sadly had a few injuries. I probably got a bit lazier as I got older because I started off as a middle distance athlete and started moving down the distances from kind of 8 and 15s to 4s, 2s, 1s. And then I had quite a long period out of the sport where I just had a couple of recurrent injuries. I kept pining to get back into it and eventually thought, look, I'm going to try something different. I know I can't run the same as I used to be able to, and I knew that I'd be frustrated if I tried to get back into running and then couldn't hit the same levels of performance as I could when I was younger. So I thought, look, I'm just going to do something completely different. I reached out to Cardiff Athletics, who I trained with previously because I now live in Cardiff. Told them I was thinking about javelin. They were really responsive, really, really happy for me to come down and give it a go. And yeah, pretty much first couple of throws, I was like, this sport is awesome. And, the rest is history, I guess. That was a few years ago, and I've just absolutely been enamored by javelin ever since.
I think that's like a recurring theme for a lot of masters athletes, because a lot of them tend to start out with one thing when they're younger. This is from the people I've spoken to anyway. A lot of them seem to start out with something completely different when they're in their teens, their senior age categories. And then when they get to the masters category, a lot of them just seem to switch to, like yourself, to javelin, or just because they realize, like you say, your body starts becoming capable of different things, and it's just like a natural transition almost. So was javelin always the one then, would you say, aside from did you try other things alongside that as well, or was it literally just javelin and that's it?
So I think it was pretty much just javelin. So like I said, by the time I dropped out of athletics for a period of my 20s, I'd pretty much done every track event. So I had a really good understanding of what I liked and what I didn't like from a track perspective. I then spent obviously the period out of athletics spending more time in the gym and stuff like that. I obviously bulked up quite a lot more, and so going back into athletics, I'm carrying a lot more weight than I used to as a skinny 18-year-old. So I was thinking, well, is there a better use of the kind of strength and power that I built? And that's where I was thinking about throwing. And I think there's just something quite cool about javelin, in that it is one of the original ancient Olympic sports. It's the instrument itself, like this massive 2.7 meter long spear. It's quite primal. yeah, I think I was just drawn to it as something that's a little bit quirky from the outside looking in, a little bit different. And I do sometimes look at events like shot and discus, and think, oh, they'd be interesting as well. But I'm right now I'm still focusing on trying to figure out how to throw a javelin without kind of complicating things onto other sports.
So what is it about? Well, you probably spoke about it just then a little bit actually, but what is it about javelin specifically, would you say, that makes you want to be better as an athlete and just a person in general? What is it about the sport that really gets you going?
So I think one thing that I've always loved about athletics in general is that you're really able to compete against yourself. It's not just okay, I'm competing against all these other people. I mean, that is obviously part of it, and competition is great, and I love competition, and I am a competitive person, which is why I really enjoy track and field. But it's that immediate feedback you get, whether that's on the track and it's like, okay, I can run a 400 meters in whatever time, and then you're competing against that every time you set on the track. Javelin's very much the same, but obviously even more so because you have like that visual cue of how well you're throwing. You have that instant feedback. That can be good and bad, because if you're throwing badly, it can be really frustrating as a sport. But when things go well, there's no better feeling than seeing that javelin soar past, what you thought was your physical limit, or trying to pursuing, a further physical limit. And for me at the moment, I really want to work towards getting past 50 meters, which right now is still quite a bit beyond my PB, but it's like a really nice physical target, particularly because a lot of athletics clubs around the country are seeing their infields being used by football increasingly. The halfway line is like a nice physical objective that I can quite clearly see this white marked out line, and aim for that when I'm throwing.
Because if I'm not mistaken, you're 35, 36?
35, yeah.
So you've literally just come into the Masters category pretty much. So have there been any, with the transition from senior to Masters, has there been any like shocks in terms of like stuff you weren't expecting, or has it been quite a smooth transition in that sense?
I'd say it's been really smooth. I think one thing that I've found in athletics as a whole is that it's a very supportive community. That's one reason why I think I've spent so much of my life drawn to athletics and competing in athletics. Like I grew up playing football, through school and university, but I've always found athletics to be a much more supportive and nicer environment to be a part of. And that's something I think that has been really, really apparent with Masters, particularly, is that it's this really, really great, collection of athletes who just want to kind of cheer each other on and see you doing better. I think my second competition this year, I met a chap who's in the Masters 70s category for javelin, and is still competing and going strong. And yeah, I mean, that's kind of what I aspire to be like. I'd love to be throwing javelin for the rest of my life, and so to see people like that is almost my next kind of ambition of how can I make sure that I can prolong this now and continue the sport that I love for the rest of my life.
It really is a mixed bag, like you say. I mean, you've got yourself, he's 35, and then you've got like 70-year-olds, sometimes 80-year-olds still throwing these really heavy javelins or shots or discus, and it's incredible. I mean, that's one of the things I really like about the Masters category personally. I mean, obviously, seeing the younger athletes really succeed is amazing, but just to see so many people from so many different backgrounds like doing really well in the sports that they love, it's brilliant. I actually think the Masters community doesn't get enough credit for what they do, in all honesty. It's just there's so many amazing things that go on that a lot of people don't know about.
I think one thing that I've been really looking forward to about becoming a Masters athlete is the additional competitions. I think particularly as a throws athlete, it can be really tricky to find throws competitions. Sadly, athletics relies on volunteers, and a lot of the time there's not enough volunteers. And more often than not, it's sadly the field events that are the ones that get cut to make way for track events. And so trying to find enough competitions throughout the year for me to go and compete can be quite tricky. So having, now being a masters athlete, it opens me up to a whole new world of competition. And so, I'm really looking forward to at the end of, or the middle of September is the British Masters Championships, which I'm really excited about because I'll get to see the Masters in its in its full glory, I guess, of all of these athletes from across the UK. But obviously, there's also opportunities as a Masters athlete where you can enter yourself into like European and Worlds and go and compete abroad. And again, that's something that I didn't think I'd have the opportunity to do, particularly now because of my age. So that's definitely something I'll be looking to do over the next couple of years.
I didn't think of it actually from that perspective of things, of competence. That's true, actually. So how has this past year gone for you then, would you say, in terms of your training and competitions? Because obviously you transitioning into this new category, what has this past year been like in terms of all that kind of stuff?
So I'd say it's been a really mixed year. So I missed a couple of years again through injury. So I obviously said earlier that I was a track athlete. I then got injured. I then, for some reason, decided to go into probably the most injury prone of all the sports in track and field with javelin. But yeah, luckily I'm back fit and healthy. I'm able to throw without any pain, and that's the key thing. So this year for me was mainly about getting through a full summer season without getting any injuries and just getting into the feel of it. So number one, I've absolutely loved being back in competitions again. I feel like I've made so many new friends. I've got to see some amazing performances. That has been a huge highlight for me throughout the season. Like, irrespective of my own performances, it's been great just to be back competing. Like the smell of the track on a sunny day, all of that I absolutely love. In terms of my actual performances, I've been a little bit disappointed. I was really hoping it's going to kick on. So my PB at the moment is just over 40 meters. I was really hoping to push past that. It's been very hot and cold, I'd say, in training this year, where I've had some training sessions where I feel like I'm comfortably throwing my PB off like 3 steps. And then I'm going to competitions and I'm struggling to even get close to it. And I've just not been able to take training form into competition this year. I've also been trying to go back to basics and strip things back and really nail some of the technical basics of javelin. But obviously then when you start adjusting things, it can throw stuff out of rhythm a little bit. So it's been a bit of a learning season, I'd say. But I'm just looking forward to having a really good winter and obviously building on my experience this year, ready for next year.
Because I know that you've been doing a lot of training diaries on your social media this past, I don't know, I think it's been this past year or so, hasn't it? You've really ramped it up in terms of showing people what you do behind the scenes, basically, before you do all of your competitions. So how do those training diaries play such a vital part in your master's journey, would you say?
I think for me, there's probably 2 elements to it. I think, one, it's been great for myself because I can go back and see the progress I'm making and, assess how far I've come, particularly if I am having a bit of a rough period. I can look back and say, well, actually, 4 months ago, I was only able to do this. I was only lifting this much or throwing this far. So having that physical documentation of that has been really nice. I think the other thing is I'd love to inspire more masters athletes. I love the sport and I'd love to do what I can to promote it. I know I'm not a world-class 70, 80 meter thrower, but what I'm hoping is I can show that anybody, who has a passion for the sport can get involved and compete and enjoy it. And that's something that, I really want to kind of take forward with obviously my videos.
Have you had much feedback from your videos as well? Have you had athletes coming up to you and saying that they really enjoyed this particular video or this particular training routine that you've been showing? Have you had much feedback in that sense?
Surprisingly, yes. Particularly earlier on in the season when I was posting a lot more regular. Actually had a child after my first competition this year and became a father for the first time. So that disrupted training and posting somewhat. So things have been a bit quieter the last couple of months. But yeah, definitely at the beginning of the season, I was having a lot of people kind of reaching out to me and saying, oh, I loved your video, or it's great to see this, this training session you were doing, or, certain exercises or stuff like that. And then, through Neuff, I've actually had a few people recently, where you guys have reshared some of my content. I've had people then at events that I've been to more recently coming up to me and saying, "Oh, I thought we recognized you. We saw you on, on Instagram and stuff." So that's actually been really nice to see the reach, of some of the content within the athletics community.
Yeah, that must really inspire you to just carry on doing what you're doing as well. For people to say that you're basically doing a great job in what you're putting out there, that must just really keep you going.
Yeah, definitely. Like I said, as much as obviously I really want to, throw further and be more competitive and, achieve higher standards, I'd love to do as much as I can to put athletics on the map and, promote athletics and, get more people involved and inspire those who are already involved to keep going and, continue into masters and, see this as a lifelong pursuit. So yeah, it is really nice, obviously, when you get any feedback or see the reach that this content has.
Yeah, 100%. And you said just then as well about your baby, which was born, I think it was a few months ago, wasn't it? She was born?
Yeah, she was born mid-April.
And it's your first child, so quite the life change. So
Yeah,
how
literally.
I know it's only been a few months, but has it changed anything in the way you see things from your perspective with your sport?
Um, I mean, it's definitely been a huge change. I was really lucky that we were able to sneak in a competition 2 or 3 weeks before she was born, so I could scientifically see if having a baby makes it better or worse. And I have actually thrown further this season since having the baby, so I
Wow.
read into that what you will. Um, I think there's a couple of things. I think one, obviously, as a parent, I want to stay fit and healthy, and be able to do all the things that parents want to do. And so, I definitely see sport as a huge part of that. And I'd love as my child grows up for her to be able to see me compete and do things, and for that to inspire her to get involved in sports. Whatever sport that is. Obviously, I'd love it to be track and field. Um, it has been tough. I'm really lucky that my wife's so amazing, and she's been able to obviously, give me the flexibility to try and squeeze training in around, a full time job and trying to look after our child. Is trying to find that balance, and that's something that we're still navigating. Is how to squeeze that in. And one thing that I've been really conscious of is, okay, I'm maybe not able to train as much, both because I have more responsibilities and less time in the day, but also I'm obviously a lot more tired than I used to be. So it's how can I make sure that the training I am doing is a lot more impactful and effective, and really make sure I'm training with purpose. I think that's been a big change. I'm not just training for the sake of training and trying to hit the numbers of, okay, I'm training 5 times a week, 6 times a week. It's now, okay, I'm training less, but how can I make that training more effective?
And let's just say she does grow up and she says to you, Daddy, I want to get my own javelin, or Daddy, I want to put some spikes in my shoes and I actually want to get out onto the track for the first time. What, from your experiences in the sport over the years, what do you think would be your main pieces of advice to her just as she would be starting out in the sport?
I'd say, I mean, the biggest thing is enjoy it. Find something you enjoy, and you're set. Like, you're never going to go far in anything you don't enjoy, because if you don't enjoy it, you're not going to want to do the training. You're not going to want to spend the time there. Fundamentally, like I said earlier on, athletics, you can compete against yourself. So even if you're not, you know, that great at a sport, you have your own personal best. You have that time to go against, or that distance, and that's the brilliant thing about the sport. It doesn't matter. It takes all ages, all sizes, all abilities. Like, there's literally, I genuinely believe there's a sport for every single person in athletics. Regardless of who you are, what you look like, how big you are, how small you are, like whatever. There's a sport that's perfect for you. So yeah, I think in the early days, if she said, "Look, I'd love to have a go and doing something," I'd say, "Brilliant! Like, go try everything and see what you love." And yeah, I mean, obviously, I'd absolutely love that, because I love the sport, I love the environment, and it'd be great to pass that on.
Oh yeah, 100%. And if you could go back and tell your younger self anything, I mean, obviously the Gary that was just starting out and didn't have as much of an idea of the sport as you do now, what would you say to him?
One of the biggest things would be to persevere through the difficult periods. it's like life's too short to have regrets, but I do feel like I missed out on a good few years of athletics where I just kind of lost myself a bit in my 20s. Like I said, I'd had a few injuries. I fell out of love a bit with the sport because I'd had lots of injuries, and I went through this kind of cycle of I'd come back to training, I'd start to get fit again, and I'd get injured again, and I'd be off, and then I'd come back and I get injured, and that can really beat you down. Like anyone who's had injuries will know it's a horrible period. But then now as an older athlete, I look back and I think I lost a huge chunk of my 20s, which is physiologically kind of some of the best periods of your life to do sport. And I think, what I'd give now as an older athlete, where it takes me an extra day or two to recover every single time I do something, what I wouldn't give to go back and be in my 20s and doing something, even if it is at a lower standard, just to be out competing and stuff. And that's going back to that enjoyment part. It's like, really focus on the enjoyment element of it. Yes, competition's, great, but I think, persevere through the difficult times and really focus on just enjoying it.
Yeah, because I think athletes are so hard on themselves, especially the teens and the younger ones, because I mean, like we've been saying, it's a solo sport pretty much. So if something goes wrong, or if you've got like a really bad injury, I think a lot of them automatically think that it's game over in a lot of instances, and then, like you say, it can take them months, maybe sometimes even years, to gain their confidence back again. So yeah, I mean,
and obviously I'm a masters athlete now, and I still have those toxic thoughts time to time. Like, this year I had a competition in Basingstoke where I'd driven 2.5 hours to Basingstoke. I had 3 throws. I fouled 2 of them. I threw horribly on the one that was a valid throw, and then I had a 2.5 hour drive home. And the whole drive home, I'm thinking, it was horrible. Like, why am I doing this for? Should I quit? And I had those thoughts kind of running through my head, and I was, really downbeat. But it's easy to happen, I think, in the heat of competition and the heat of the moment. But fundamentally, like, I do love the sport. I do really enjoy it, and I am hard on myself because I do want to be better and I do want to be competitive. And as you say, I think that is just the nature of being a sports person to a degree. I do strive to be a good athlete. But obviously, sometimes I need to just step back and say, well, yes, okay, I didn't throw well, but fundamentally, I also do this for enjoyment, and I need to focus on that element of it, because otherwise you go down this spiral of bad toxic thoughts, and and then it becomes not enjoyable. So I think it is really important sometimes just to take a step back and forget some of the competitive element and just focus on the the enjoyment aspect of it. Like, I love just going out throwing my javelin, and having that, having fun with the sport, I guess.
yeah, I completely agree. If there's no passion in it, then it kind of makes you think, what's the point? Like, if you're not doing it for the enjoyment of it, then maybe find something else, because if you don't enjoy it, then you're ultimately not going to get anywhere that far, if we're being realistic. So it happens to the best of us. I mean, like you having your down days and thinking, should I be here? Should I continue? I mean, even the top athletes still get that from time to time. So yeah, it really does happen to everyone. So just to round up then, Gary, so if you look at, let's say the next 10 years, because obviously from 35 onwards, like, you've got so many different categories in the masters rankings. What are you hoping is in your near and distant future? What are you hoping to achieve as the years go on?
So I think I've got 15 years. I think it's 50 where the javelin goes down in weight as a masters athlete. I'm looking at that thinking, okay, I've got 15 years to really attack my personal best with an 800-gram javelin, and see what I can do with that. So very short term, I just want to really do a lot of work on improving technically and really nailing like the technical basics of javelin. It's obviously a really, really technical sport that I've come into really late in my life, and I look at a lot of throwers who make it look really, really easy. And we're really lucky. There's some really great throwers in the UK right now. But a lot of them have been throwing like 10, 15, 20 years, whereas I've been throwing kind of 2 or 3 with quite a lot of time off through injury in that period. So very short term, I really just want to nail some of those technical basics and kind of get that ironed out. I'd love to break the 50-meter barrier. Like, that for me is a really big personal target. And fundamentally, I just want to keep competing. At whatever level, I want to keep myself healthy and, stay part of the sport. Like 10, 15, 20, 30, 40 years, I still want to be Gary throwing his javelin.
Yeah, I mean, I think within 15 years, I think you've got a few good comps ahead of you still yet. So there's nothing to worry about on that front, at least, that's for sure. But yeah, Gary, we'll keep an eye on you. We'll see how you get on. And in the meantime, thank you so much for speaking to me.
That's all. Thanks, Jack. Really appreciate it.